Now, Jake's talking about the cold open, something that we can say. You know, we're supposed to say something witty to start the show off with, and then Jake clips it and puts it in at the beginning.
Oh,
that's what a cold open is, and we're not flowing with creative juice right
now. No. But I'm just going to clip that, so let's go get started.
Perfect.
A podcast about bourbon and the ones who drink it. This is Bourbon Matters. Welcome to Bourbon Matters. I'm Jake.
I'm Dan.
And I'm Gold Eagle Jake.
And tonight we're talking about the redheaded stepchild of American whiskey, Tennessee whiskey.
Sorry to all the redheads out there.
Yeah, sorry.
Not that Jake said that you're a redhead.
Good old Tennessee. Well, first off, before we get into Tennessee whiskey,
real quick.
Before we get into Tennessee whiskey, I have to bring this up because it's kind of amazing how the universe works sometimes. On the last episode, we were talking a little bit about Kenai Farms, and I had shouted out my new friend David because I know he lives out that way, and said, hey, if anyone is listening that has samples of Kenai Farms, bring them by. I would love to taste them. He ended up bringing them by before that episode even aired. So, yeah, the universe is working its powers. I got some samples, and of course I forgot to bring them home, so I don't have them to taste. So in a future episode, I will taste those and give my feedback on it. But I just thought that was pretty cool. So no need to bring me any more Kenai Farm samples. We will get to those soon.
I mean, I can drive like 20 minutes down the road and get some, but I choose not to.
Well, we know that.
Seems like a lot of work, and I don't really just want to do that extra work.
You don't like doing any work.
That's fair. That's a very fair point.
It's pulling teeth to get you to do 30 seconds of research for this.
I should just go to Wikipedia like you do and get fake research. That's what we should do. So, well, that's awesome that Jake apparently is leaking out information about our future podcasts, and somehow it gets to you that you need samples. I'm kidding. It's not true.
I mean, I don't know. Maybe he is. I don't know.
Yeah.
Or it's just the universe.
He's a shiesty guy. But no, we want to take a little time today. We haven't. I know we mentioned it once a long time ago. But Tennessee whiskey, for a lot of people, just kind of gets tossed aside. It's got to be Kentucky or it's not good whiskey. So is that a true statement? And should we not be drinking Tennessee whiskey? I'm actually drinking some Tennessee whiskey tonight.
Same.
So we're all just drinking bad whiskey tonight then, apparently, from what some people like to say.
I'm surprised we haven't covered this because it's a pretty big topic, I think, in the whiskey world. And yeah, why does Tennessee whiskey get a bad rap?
Yeah.
Why do people look at the bottle when they see distilled in Tennessee? Do they get afraid of it or put the bottle back down?
Yeah, it's always been a weird, like, stigma to me. I've always enjoyed Tennessee whiskey, so I never really understood why people were so, like, polarized on it. But before we go further, we should...
Well, let's just get the D word out of the way.
Dickel.
Yeah.
Which is probably... And, like, I actually really like Dickel. And I don't really know why people hate it so much. Dan, you like it too, right? So
Yeah,
we don't really have a dissenter here.
Yeah, it's not like it's my favorite distillery, but like the 13-year Dickel I had a few years ago was great. I think the normal Dickel 8-year for the price range is really good. But yeah, I don't have any problem with Dickel. I'm not actively avoiding a Dickel-made product or a product made with Dickel in it.
It does have a very distinct taste. profile, and most of the time for me, I mean, a lot of people use the Flintstone vitamin as a tasting note for Dickel, and I do think it kind of has like a really, really dry oak character to it. There's definitely not a lot of like pop like you get on Kentucky bourbon with your caramels and your vanillas. It's kind of more like a sandy, dried oak. And I think that is a very distinct flavor profile that you either really, really hate it or you don't mind it.
I
And
mean,
I'm
isn't
with,
that because a lot of the stuff at Dickel is actually like 50 years old?
I mean, it is, their price points are pretty wild to have
Yeah.
and I mean, the downside is a lot of their stuff is lower proof. Like their 15-year cash strength single barrel is usually around 80 to 85 proof for a cash strength, but it sits on the shelf at like $70 and it's 15
Which
years
is
old.
so wild.
Right. But yeah, so one example or question that I have, or I guess not question, but an example from the field was we were at Bardstown Bourbon Company with a bunch of bourbon people, and one person asked, "Why do you guys always have to put Dickel in every single blend that you do? It just completely ruins the blends." And their response was, "You must not be a blender then if you think that." Because
Yeah.
they claim that Dickel is a very key component in blends. And if it's, when it's missing, you can definitely tell and it falls flat. And you don't need a lot of it. And even if you don't like it on its own, it does a really good job to kind of round out blends from different distilleries by throwing a little bit of Dickel in there.
Yeah, if you're questioning what Jake's saying right now, pick up any bottle of Bardstown or Barrel or any other high-end blended whiskey and look at where it's sourced from, and it says Tennessee on it, and that means Dickel. I guarantee
For the most
every
part.
blend
For the most
you have
part, yeah.
is
I'd say
basically from
let's
Dickel.
not throw wild fake guarantees out there. Like,
I'm
let's
willing
calm
to
down
guarantee
a
that.
little bit about what we're talking.
There's a few more distilleries that do produce a lot of whiskey to source, but yes, for the most part, a lot of it is from Dickel. And it's amazing how many people will pick up a bottle and see the distilled in Tennessee and then not buy it or not have any interest in it just because of that factor.
Yeah. I think one of the first factors that goes into it is we've talked about the people before that they'll only buy bourbon from Kentucky because Kentucky is the only one that makes bourbon. And the reason people say that is we've talked about water source and everything before and kind of disprove that, or not disprove the myth that it's good water, but disprove the fact that it's not just them that have that type of water. I think a lot of that is marketing because forever you've been able to go down to Kentucky, and especially in our area, it's not too far to get to Kentucky, to the Bourbon Trail, and everyone on the Bourbon Trail preaches the same thing, that the best whiskey or bourbon in the world comes from Kentucky, and I think that's just something that gets imprinted into our head, and even though stuff that's grown and distilled in Tennessee is in the exact same climate as Kentucky, it's just marketed to us that Kentucky's got to be better than Tennessee.
Yeah, I mean, that you bring up a good point, and I also think a big contribution to that is because if you look at Tennessee distilleries, they kind of like want to be different. They kind of market themselves as being different. Jack Daniel's is essentially bourbon. It's made the same way. It follows all the bourbon laws.
Yeah, they could call it bourbon if they wanted to.
Right. They can call it bourbon if they wanted to, but they're trying to do their own thing and call themselves Tennessee whiskey and just be their own thing. Even if you look at smaller, newer distillery, for example, Chattanooga, one of our favorites, they market themselves as Tennessee high malt whiskey, even though most of their whiskeys technically qualify as bourbon.
Yeah, so let's talk about what actually makes a Tennessee whiskey real quick. So in
Distilled
2013,
in Tennessee.
Yeah, in 2013, Tennessee codified the legal qualifications for being called Tennessee whiskey, which basically is it has to be a bourbon distilled in Tennessee. They do stipulate that they're supposed to use the Lincoln County process, which we'll talk about in a second. Though there is a carve out for Benjamin Pritchard's that does not use the Lincoln County process, and is the only one that was grandfathered in that way. If for those that don't know, the Lincoln County process is basically charcoal filtration of the distilled spirit. Jack Daniels is probably like the most well known for this because they push it a lot in their marketing and stuff, especially for Gentleman Jack because it's double charcoal filtered. I actually think that the Lincoln County process is one of the things that turn people off because they go, oh, it's going to taste like charcoal. And like, I know a lot of people say that when they drink Jack Daniels, they're like, oh, I can taste the charcoal. And like, which is not real.
It's BS.
If you drink water out of a Brita filter, you're drinking charcoal filtered water and it does not taste like charcoal. So
yeah, I think it's more of the draw. I think it's more of the thought of the first time you had whiskey was probably Jack Daniels, and you thought it was awful. That's I still don't like Jack Daniels Old Number 7 at all.
But because you're not a man.
No, but I drink Jack. I drink Jack Bonded. I drink.
So you
10 to 12.
You bring up a good point there because I think nobody really took Jack Daniels seriously until the last maybe 5-10 years ago. Because basically all they
last 5. I would say last 5.
Because all they had was Number 7 and Gentleman Jack, and it wasn't your bourbon connoisseurs that were drinking it. It was people that were mixing it with Coke, or when they were feeling fancy, they would throw Gentleman Jack over some ice. Now we've seen how good the barrel proofs can be. We've seen how good the Bonded series is. We've seen how good the 10 and 12 years are, the Coy Hill. So I think Jack has really emerged and just very recently, last 5 years, is becoming a big player that can compete with a lot of the best Kentucky distilleries or any distillery out there.
Yeah, it's just breaking that old stipulation that it's your college whiskey or your Jack and your Coke and your cheap shitty whiskey. I think it's more of that when you talk about Jack, not the charcoal filters. It's just you think of cheap shitty whiskey.
Yeah, I mean the bonus for them though is that they've been well ahead of the curve on production for the better part of like their entire existence. So a lot of these, bad concepts about their brand, they could really, they have done a lot in the past few years to undo a lot of those with the Bonded series, the single barrel proofs, some of the Coy Hill releases, like you said, the 10 and 12 year, which I'm drinking the 10 year right now. And like they have I'm sure they have so much 10-year product, 12-year product, and all these different experiments that could be labeled as Coy Hill. And obviously they're able to put Bonded on the shelf every day. So I think in the next couple years, like all of those Jack Daniels stigmas will be totally gone.
If they aren't already.
I don't know. I think you're always going to fight that in the States. Like, that's the crazy thing, though, is it's only that way in the States. You go anywhere international, and all they talk about is Jack.
Yeah.
Yeah, but they love American whiskey, and they're so limited on what they can get internationally that they don't really have a whole lot to choose from.
Yeah. When I was in, my favorite thing was when I was in Slovenia, our tour guide, whenever I was getting to cool mountaintops and stuff and drinking whiskey, I was sharing American whiskey with him, and he was starting to like it. And whenever we go out to a restaurant, I'd see what they have besides Jack, and we'd run into a Four Roses and stuff. And before I left, I wanted to get him a gift besides his tip, and went to every single place in bled Slovenia that sold liquor. And the only thing I could find that wasn't Jack Daniels was I actually found a Jack Daniels single barrel at one place. I was able to get them. But like I even went back to the restaurant that had Four Roses to try and see if they'd sell me a Four Roses bottle. But yeah, it's anywhere in the U.S. or anywhere outside the U.S. People love Jack and have no problem with it. It's for a lot of us, it was just the first thing you drank and it didn't taste good. And you were probably like, I mean, 5 years ago when I was getting big into whiskey, I still wouldn't drink Jack Daniels, and I tried straight Jack Old Number 7. I still didn't like it, but the second I tried Jack Bonded, I changed my complete view of them as a distillery and the products they're putting out. I still don't have to drink Jack Number 7, and I still can say it tastes like shit to me because it does. But otherwise, I'd say Jack has probably been my most surprising distillery for me, just from what I remember from growing up. That sounds awful. Just what I remember from when I first started drinking whiskey, and I think that's a big stipulation that they have to get through in the States.
Yeah, I totally agree. I had no idea Jack could be this good until actually it was the Adventures Club that was like, we need to do a Jack barrel proof pick. And I'm like, ew, I don't like Jack Daniels. This was probably 7 or 8 years ago and completely changed my whole perception on Jack Daniels.
Mm-hmm.
And I still haven't been there. It's on my bucket list. I need to get down there.
It's like, what, 2 hours south of Kentucky?
Yeah. Yeah, I
It's
want to
fun.
make it. I want to do
cool tour.
I want to do like just a Tennessee trip though. I want to go to Nashville. I've never been to Nashville. There's some, I guess, fun. You can call it moonshine distilleries down there too. Old Smoky.
Yeah.
Hit up Nashville Barrel, and then spend a day or two at Jack Daniels because that would be really cool.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I mean,
so I guess go
go
ahead.
ahead, Jake. No,
I was just gonna say, I guess speaking of other distilleries, like what are some other distilleries? There's lots of other Tennessee whiskey, either producers or distilleries. We got Heaven's Door, Nashville Barrel, Nelson Greenbrier.
Lots of like
What
new
else am I
distilleries in the last few years too.
Yeah, I'm sure there's a lot of like smaller, newer ones. Cascade Hollow, which is where Dickel's made. Dan, you mentioned Leaper's Fork.
Leaper's Fork. When I got a buddy that lives right close to there, he's
and
been there
Nearest
a few times.
Screen.
Oh yeah.
That's a new brand that's been really kind of on fire lately.
Is Uncle Nearest out of Tennessee as well too?
Yes, Uncle Nearest at Nearest Green.
Isn't that Nearest Green?
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
Which that's like
That's basically the guy that made all the stuff for Jack Daniels.
yeah, it's not really an offshoot of Jack Daniels,
No,
but kind of is.
It's named after.
But it's named after Nearest Green, who is the original distiller for Jack Daniels.
Yes.
When it was just Jack and him distilling shit on the side of a river.
Yeah. The one I've never tried, and I still to this day haven't, and I don't know why, is one of my, like when I first started getting and drinking a lot, or starting to buy whiskey and drinking a lot of whiskey, one of my first favorite bottles was actually a Tennessee whiskey, and it was Bell Mead Reserve barrel proof bourbon. And I really, really loved it. I still have an unopened bottle to this day because they don't make that anymore. They've switched to kind of underneath of their Nelson Greenbrier Reserve label. But that's where that had come from.
Is that MGP though? That Bell Mead?
I can't remember. I have to go check the bottle on it.
Those were really, really good. And yeah, they used to use MGP, and now I think they switched to Nelson Greenbrier now that they have their own distillate. But yeah, I think that was. I'm glad you brought that up because I think Bell Mead was one of the first brands out of Tennessee, even though it wasn't Tennessee distillate, that people kind of really took seriously and put it up with a lot of the big hitters in Kentucky bourbon.
Yeah, and like that was probably a smart play, to use use MGP, establish the brand. And from what I remember, Bell Mead doesn't boast that they're Tennessee whiskey on the
No,
label.
it was sourced from Lawrenceburg, Indiana.
Yeah. The way Jack like slaps Tennessee whiskey in like the biggest letters they can on the label. So yeah, it definitely, gets people to pick up the bottle and doesn't scare them away.
You wanna read some fun internet fights? Just go look up any post in any whiskey group about someone calling Jack Daniels a bourbon.
Yeah. Which it technically is.
It technically is, and it's
They
honestly
just choose not to label it that
the
way.
funniest threads of people arguing back and forth whether it's a bourbon or not.
It legally meets all the requirements.
There's probably somebody listening to this screaming right now saying it is not a bourbon.
Yeah.
It's not a bourbon because they don't call it a bourbon. If you follow the rules of what it takes to be a bourbon, it is it checks every single box you need to call it a bourbon. So
yeah. Well, a lot of that is, we don't need to get into this because hopefully everybody that watches this understands now that Kentucky is not the only place that can produce a bourbon.
I think
there are a lot of people that still believe that is the case.
Yeah, everyone understands that, I think, but people will still argue that the charcoal filtration makes it not
taints
bourbon.
It somehow.
Yeah, which technically I don't think that's true. I think they're still following all the laws of bourbon. They're not adding anything to it.
Right. It's not any kind of other filtrate, like any other filtered bourbon is still a bourbon. It's just a method of filtration.
And that's the thing is like, if you want to talk about filtration, stuff that's chill filtered is going to be completely different than what a charcoal filtration is, right?
Mm-hmm.
So like, that's the big thing is a lot of us prefers to see stuff that's non-chill filtered, which just basically means there could be some tiny little particulates that made it through a tiny little filter that's in the bottle, where if you chill it, you can make sure that all that gets out. But it's going to be the exact same. I'd say charcoal filter is probably to the same or less filtered than what chill filtered would be.
Yeah. And I think charcoal
and no one's
filtration,
ever going to say, oh, I can tell that it was chill filtered.
No.
I mean,
not unless you put ice in it.
Unless you're
or freeze the bottle.
Say you're a whiskey sommelier.
Yeah.
Then may possibly. But I mean, it's such a small, tiny difference that almost all bourbon, almost the majority of whiskey drinkers would never be able to tell the difference. Jake's typing on his keyboard. I'm getting worried about
charcoal filtration might even leave more of those like fatty like solids and stuff in too.
Well, I just wanted to make sure
chill filtration for sure strips everything. So
I just wanted to look up the charcoal filtration process. So the whiskey is distilled to 140 proof. Then it is filtered drop by drop through 10 feet of sugar maple charcoal. The process is gravity driven. It mellows the whiskey, blah, 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 removes some of the grainy flavor from the corn, and allows other flavors to shine through, like vanilla. But it's done before the whiskey enters the barrel.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And before it's, cut down to 125. So I could maybe see the argument if they were charcoal filtering it after aging. But it's before it gets cut. It's before it goes into the barrel. And I think you brought up a good point, Dan, with chill filtering. How is that any different or worse than doing the charcoal filter process?
Yeah, and just so everyone's on the same page, when you put whiskey into a charred barrel, that's a thin layer of charcoal around the barrel. It's basically a similar process as it moves in and out of the wood. It's filtering the whiskey to some degree and removing some of those like sulfurs and like other like bullshit that you don't want in your end product. Dan can check me if I'm correct in that.
He looks like he wants to correct you.
I mean, it's part of the process. I mean, charcoal is burnt wood. I mean,
right.
Basically, they're burnt organic matter at the end of the day.
Yeah.
So. But, Yeah, people that say that they can taste that's complete bullshit. That's just mind games. It's your brain's playing on you because you don't like something and you don't want to like it. We've all had that. Like, you got to go in with an open mind. But I think, like, going back to the whole Jack Daniels thing, though, is like, that's what everyone thinks of a Tennessee whiskey. I mean, that's what they've marketed it as. So whenever you hear Tennessee whiskey, the first thing you think is Jack Daniels. But then when we talk about Chattanooga, it's completely different. I mean, that is a very high-end craft brand that does a lot of unique stuff that is completely nothing like they do at Jack Daniels, but makes phenomenal whiskey. And if you're not trying it because all you're doing is thinking of Tennessee whiskey and then associating that with Jack Daniels, you're going to miss out on some really good whiskey.
Yeah, which I don't think Chattanooga charcoal filters, right? So they don't actually qualify as Tennessee whiskey, but they call themselves Tennessee high malt.
They call themselves Tennessee high malt whiskey. And yeah, I'm pretty sure they do not charcoal filter. But I'm going to verify.
That's the thing is, like, whenever you hear Tennessee whiskey, that's what you're going to think about. The first thing you're going to think is Jack Daniels.
Oh, yeah.
And then if you're a whiskey person, the second thing you're going to think about is charcoal filter.
Yeah.
And that's what you're going to classify all Tennessee whiskey as, regardless of what it is. And it's just your brain, and you let your little noggin take over all the thinking, and don't let your taste buds take over.
Which, I mean, I would be very surprised if a lot of the newer brands like Heaven's Door, Nelson Greenbrier, Uncle Nearest, and others actually charcoal filtered.
Didn't you guys do a blind of Kentucky versus Tennessee once, Jake? If not, we need to. You should do that.
Yeah, we should do that. That would be a fun one. We have done.
Almost no one would be able to pick out.
I mean,
difference.
we have had Jack Daniel's barrel proof single barrel beat Stag 3 out of 3 times.
Yeah.
Yeah. But I like doing, like, you could do like the full lineup and do a Nelson versus a Heaven Hill style of setup and work your way through.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, it's the same thing as when we talk about age statements and everything too. Don't read a label if you're going to try something new. Like, if you want to expand your palate, then just ignore what a label says.
Well, read the label, but you don't need to. No. You don't need to be influenced by location,
age,
whatever.
Any of that stuff is all just thought. Because
as long as it's straight bourbon or straight whiskey, it's fine.
Yeah, as long as it's not rye, it's going to be
worth
perfect.
trying.
Just don't drink rye.
Yeah.
So all you got to
listen to Dan.
It's the smart one in this group.
The most limited palate of the three of us.
You know what? I like what I like, boys. I like what I like.
Dan, I got a new whiskey for you.
What's that?
I just tasted it yesterday.
Wait, hold on. Is it from Tennessee? Because I won't drink it.
No.
Okay, all right. That's fine then.
Wow. Hater and hypocrite. I forgot the name. We're going to be getting it in soon, but it qualifies as a rye whiskey and also qualifies as a Scotch whiskey.
So they're doing a single malt.
What? No.
Yeah.
Single malt rye?
Yeah, it's a rye.
An American rye whiskey?
No. Can't qualify as a Scotch.
No,
though.
Yeah,
but just a rye whiskey.
It's a rye whiskey that's distilled and aged in Scotland.
Is it well, it can't be. Single grain is still malt, right? So it's not a single grain.
Right. Well, no, single grain.
It could be a single grain of rye.
Yeah, single grain basically means it's made in Scotland, but it's not Scotch, or it's not just malt. Like, there's more. It's very confusing because
that's what I.
Yeah, single grain means multiple grains and not just malt.
Yeah. Okay, that's right.
It's basically what Scotland calls any whiskey that is not pot stilled.
A Scottish distilled whiskey.
Yeah, Scottish distilled whiskey. So anything on a column still, which can be bourbon mash bill. Like we tried that Strathclyde, that was a bourbon mash bill, 18-year from Single Cask Nation, and it tasted like a bourbon, but it had like a little bit of maybe a hint of like scotchiness to it. So yeah, it's very confusing stuff, but
That's
yeah,
also the one I didn't like.
Leave it to Europe to not make things straightforward.
right?
Yeah. No, that I've had malted rye before, and I hate it even more.
Why?
I just didn't like the flavor. Like
They're sweeter.
The last time I had one, I
You're
think was the
nuts.
Hard Truth one that you had, and I hated it.
You're out of your mind.
Because you bought all the Hard Truth lineup or whatever.
Yeah.
And
Well, you
had the
don't like
malted rye.
rye.
Yeah.
Lots of people who, I mean, actually, most people who aren't big rye fans do like malted rye. So I'm surprised you didn't.
He does. If you blinded him, he wouldn't know.
Bring it. Bring it.
All right. Next time you're over, we're gonna do a rye blind,
All right.
and you're gonna like every single one of them.
I'm just gonna do a blind. Don't even tell them it's a rye blind.
No, we did that a lot at work. Was just random blind find that was fun. Just find the rye, where you get 4 samples. One's a rye. Find it. It's funny how a lot of people have a lot of difficulties taking that out. So
They're not as different from bourbon as a lot of people think. They can be. They can.
Yeah, they
be,
can
but
be.
a lot of the time they're not.
Speaking of rye, we picked a rare character rye yesterday that won't be here for a little while. But this is the first tease. This is the first information of that barrel pick that has gotten out there. Unbelievable. You have to taste it to believe it, how good it is. It's like all rye up front, and then it just immediately turns into like a bourbon flavor, and the finish just lingers for minutes and minutes and minutes.
Nice. What's the AI generated label picture gonna be?
It's going to be an eagle theme. Maybe I'll
An
crop
eagle
Dan's
shoving
face in there.
rye down Dan's
So first off, you're going to have problems selling that barrel because it's a rye. Second off, if
First
my face
off-
is on that,
first
it's gonna be
off,
even harder if my
I
face is
guarantee
on
you that barrel will sell out the
Yeah.
day we post it. Rare Character is a brand that is just absolutely on fire right
Yeah.
now. And and the barrel is that good.
You want it to not sell, put my face on that bitch, and she will sit there forever.
We'll put a eagle like carrying you with a little baby face Dan carrying you to its nest, feeding you to its babies.
That just sounds awful. It just sounds like the worst label design I've ever heard in my life. Yeah, I wouldn't do that if I were you. Like, you run a good business, keep it that way. That got off a Tennessee whiskey quick.
Yeah.
No, I don't know. It's like I'm having my Heaven's Door tenure tonight. I've talked about the positives and negatives of it. It's not by far one of my favorites, but like
Well, they're still MGP, right?
this one, no, this is
I
Tennessee.
think the 10 years Tennessee.
10 years Tennessee.
Is that
yeah.
from them? Or
Yeah.
It's not from them,
it's
but-
Tennessee.
Yeah.
Okay.
Anything you've ever had, this is unlike anything you've ever had from Tennessee before. It's non-charcoal mellowed, so it's not.
Says Bob Dylan.
But it does fit my flavor profile because it's a high rye bourbon. It's 20% rye.
It doesn't taste like Dickel. I don't think it is Dickel.
No.
I'm drinking this Jack Daniel's Barrel Proof single barrel, which as of this podcast,
The
we have,
last
like-
one?
yeah. Which as of this recording, we have like 12 bottles on the shelf, and if they're still there when this podcast airs, and you're listening, I would jump on this one ASAP.
Do you think Bob Dylan flicked a guitar pick to pick out the 10-year barrels?
We're not going there, Dan.
No, it's if you came over and I poured this to you blind, it's 100 proof bourbon. It's 10 years old. Age, maybe you can tell. You're not going to know this is Kentucky. Like, this is a very well-rounded bourbon. My biggest thing
Tennessee?
with it, Tennessee bourbon. It's a overpriced bottle for what it is.
Wasn't it like
again,
$80?
No, it's like 100.
Oh,
It was like 1 or 110.
For 10-year though, that's
yeah, it was.
No, when you talk about Dickel, though, I mean, you can get
well.
But that's not Dickel.
no, but I'm saying you can. It's out there for cheaper. I mean, not this type, but it's a solid, well-rounded bourbon. It's high price for 100 proof. Was one of my biggest things with it. But I'm not gonna say that I am upset that I bought this bottle. If this bottle was a $70 bottle, I'd buy it all the time.
Yeah, I think you've poured me that one. It's pretty good.
But yeah, I mean, I saw it one day and I grabbed it, and I'm not upset about it. And I don't have a lot of. I think this is probably actually my only Tennessee whiskey I ever have on my shelf right now. And it's not because I don't buy Tennessee whiskey; it's just I haven't bought whiskey in a while. Because I'm trying to thin out the herd. Yeah, I think it's a good all-around whiskey.
Yeah. So I think, like, to wind down the conversation, this might wind things up, but yeah, I think Tennessee, I think, is an example of the larger attitude towards non-Kentucky bourbon. So, like,
I mean, I totally agree.
Guys, yeah, I mean,
Like,
what are your guys' thoughts on like other other American whiskeys from non-Kentucky?
Tennessee is fully embracing the fact that they're not Kentucky, and they're proud of it.
They're never going to try and
Right.
put them in the running of trying to be like Kentucky. Like,
Right.
Every distillery there is proud to put Tennessee on their label.
Like, you look at most other distilleries across the country, and they'll tell you why they're just as good or better than Kentucky. And Tennessee is like, I don't care. I could give a shit about Kentucky whiskey. This is Tennessee whiskey, and this is what we're doing, and it's different and better because blah, blah, blah.
Yeah, I mean, like, they have the Lincoln County process, which makes them unique. They also have very similar water source to Kentucky. I think a lot of it's limestone aquifer, yeah. As far as I know. But like, it's cool. I mean, like, they're not leaning into like anything particularly natural or like specific to Tennessee as a state, but it, like, we've talked about this before, I think, in a couple episodes, but it's fun when distilleries lean into their home state's uniqueness, like distilleries in Colorado with the high elevation, like Breckenridge or Old Elk, or
snow melted water.
Yeah, like or Stranahan's, like leaning into the fact that they get faster aging, they get the wide temperature swings throughout the year. They don't need to age as fast, like Texas. I know we might have to have another episode about Texas whiskey too, because people hate Texas whiskey.
Which Texas whiskey does have a different note to it. Like,
it does.
That's the one I can say it's easily distinguishable, or way more easily distinguishable than a Kentucky versus Tennessee is Texas versus almost anywhere else in the U.S.
Yeah, but I mean, like, one of the cooler, I think, regions is the Pacific Northwest, where you get more of a like Scottish kind of environment. That's where we see a lot of single malts actually, or the larger single malt, American single malt companies located.
Westland,
to try and mimic that a little bit. And those ones are, supremely successful. So yeah, it's cool when people lean into their region or their state or something that makes their area unique, you know.
And one thing we always did is like, I mean, we when I was at Whiskey Acres, we go to a lot of events, and a lot of your local events, you're going to have all your local distilleries there, and you would have people asking you, like, well, you're always at these events competing against your other local distilleries. What's it's like? And then our response is pretty much across the board, unanimous with Illinois distilleries. Is like, oh, we're not competing against them. We're competing against Kentucky. Like,
Yeah.
it's breaking the stigma that good whiskey or good bourbon has to come out of Kentucky.
Right.
So we I mean, in a perfect world, every Illinois distillery would work out, and we'd steal a lot of the Kentucky market away.
Right.
That's what we were all after. So.
And they leaned into corn. Like Illinois is only known for corn and corrupt governors, so you go with what you know.
Two things we're great at. Never gonna change, baby. Never gonna change. Sorry, didn't want to get political.
Dan's so happy we brought up politics. You can just see him, his little devilish smile.
It's a fun time for politics, man. I love it.
And that's where we cut it off.
I love it. Everything. So Jake, what Tennessee distillery is going to have a discount on your website today?
Ooh.
Boom. Force you into it this time.
I don't know. That's a good question. What do you guys want? I mean, we've done Chattanooga.
Yeah.
I guess we haven't really done Jack Daniels, but I can't discount every Jack Daniels. We got to pick a favorite or two.
Bonded. Yeah, make yourself a lovely Jack bonded. You could use the bourbon or the rye, old fashioned. It's fantastic. Either way.
I mean, we can do all three bondeds.
Triple mash is pretty good too.
Mm-hmm.
Dan doesn't like the triple mash, but that's okay.
I'll give that a grunt.
I like the triple mash. It's kind of a standalone. I don't know if it would hold up well in a cocktail, but
I like the regular bonded with chocolate bitters. It's like a dessert old fashioned. It's fantastic.
All right, BMJ bonded, 10% off any three of the Jack Daniels bonded whiskeys. BMJ bonded. That's the rye, the bourbon, and the triple mash. All three are great, especially for their price point. I think the triple mash is like $45, and the rye and bourbon are under $40. Great, neat sippers, and also do very well in cocktails. So yeah. BMJ bonded, 10% off Jack Daniels bonded.
Yeah.
Boom.
And where can they use those coupons at, Jake?
You can use it online exclusively at goldeaglewine.com, or you can download our app on the Apple App Store or Google Play Store. Apply that code at checkout. And make sure you follow us on Instagram at Gold Eagle Wine. Follow us on Facebook at Gold Eagle Spirits. Also, maybe it's not even worth mentioning because the bottle might be empty by the time this episode airs, but shout out to Jake and the Bourbon Matters podcast. Us for supplying the bottle of Stag 24A, because today we started the charity bottle for the next charity. So yeah, that's pretty cool too. Come on by the tasting bar and try that and support a great cause. Who are we benefiting?
I wasn't prepared. Hold on.
Obviously,
he doesn't even research his own ideas.
It's the Special Recreation Association of Central Lake County. It was a super long name, so I wanted to make sure I got it right.
Yeah, no, that's the only reason why I didn't know. But it is a phenomenal cause.
It's like a branch of, or it's like the Lake County Special Olympics like branch, basically. It was suggested by a listener, Michael. Thank you very much for the suggestion.
Thank you, Michael.
We're a little late, but we got it out there.
Well, we got it out there, and it's probably going to go quick because it's a pretty dang good bottle.
Yeah.
SRA, CLC, recreation, that's special, sports and recreation, local, kind of Special Olympics thing, which is very cool because doing something local to our community is something that we put first and foremost. So
yeah, and the next couple bottles will be going towards them because they're local. We really want to support local charities as much as possible. So if you have a charity
Absolutely.
that you would like us to support, please reach out. bourbonmatters@gmail.com or DM us on Instagram at Bourbon Matters or Facebook. You can't DM on Facebook. So
you can send a message.
Instagram.
You can send a message.
Yeah, or send a message. Yeah, and if you want to listen to us, you can listen to us on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, or any other podcast platform. If you want to watch the video, watch on Spotify or YouTube. Make sure you like, subscribe, share with your friends, I guess, and all that fun stuff.
Jake doesn't have friends, so please share with people so he can think that he has friends.
Yeah.
You don't know which Jake I'm talking about, so that's the greatest part of this.
I know which
It
one you're
is,
talking
but
about.
we all know
You
which
do.
one we're really talking
We all
about.
know which one I'm talking about. All right, guys. Well, I'm going to keep enjoying some Tennessee whiskey tonight.
Me too. This Chattanooga Isla is the perfect cap after that Jack Barrel Proof single barrel.
All right, boys. Cheers.
Cheers.
Cheers.